You think African American cakes were just sweet potato pie and pound cake? Think again. Black kitchens across the South created some of the most inventive, deeply meaningful layer cakes and celebration desserts in American culinary history. Let's dig into 60 African American cakes no one makes anymore. Old-fashioned jam cake was the spice-covered memory keeper of Southern Black families, a cake that used fruit preserves not for decoration but for survival. Before sugar was easy to buy and fresh fruit was available year-round, jam was what sweetened the batter and kept the cake moist. Its color was deep, its flavor warm with spices like cinnamon and clove, and its texture sturdy enough to wrap and travel. Families made it for holidays or long journeys, knowing it could feed many people without spoiling the tang of the jam mixed with the spices, to create a flavor that felt both practical and celebratory. Grandmothers often used whatever preserves they had: blackberry, peach, fig, giving each cake a personality shaped by the land and the season. But as modern desserts overtook old ones and store-bought treats became easier, jam cake faded. Few people today know the quiet satisfaction of slicing into something sweetened by a summer harvest kept through winter. Its memory still lingers, though, in the kitchens, where frugality was always matched by creativity. Applesauce spice cake was the resourceful dessert that helped families stretch ingredients during tight years, turning a jar of applesauce into something tender and warmly spiced. It baked up soft, fragrant, and comforting, flavored with cinnamon, nutmeg, and a richness that belied its thriftiness. African American mothers relied on it when fresh apples were too expensive or when sugar needed to be used sparingly. The applesauce kept the cake moist for days, making it perfect for school lunches, church dinners, or long weeks when every bit of food had to last. The cake did not need frosting. Its flavor was satisfying enough on its own. Over time, as convenience foods took over and applesauce lost its place in home baking, this humble dessert drifted out of memory. But older generations remember how it filled the house with the smell of comfort and stability. It was proof that even during hard times, sweetness could still be made from simple things. Field pea salad with hot pepper vinegar offered a cool bite for the hottest southern evenings. Tender field peas were boiled until just soft, then chilled and tossed with diced onions, sweet peppers, and a splash of sharp vinegar infused with fiery peppers. The salad balanced earthy legumes with a bright tang that woke the palate after long days in the sun. Served on wide porches as cicadas sang, it accompanied fried chicken, grilled fish, or simply a hunk of cornbread. Home gardeners prized field peas for their reliability in poor soil, and the vinegar peppers were often homemade, steeped for weeks in glass bottles on sunny windowsills. Guests at summer suppers remembered the sting of the vinegar and the gentle sweetness of the peas as the taste of true Southern hospitality. Today, packaged beans and bottled dressings have replaced the careful soaking and seasoning that once defined the dish, but the memory of its crisp, refreshing bite lingers in kitchens where tradition still holds strong. Scripture cake was once a beloved tradition that turned Bible study into baking, challenging families to decode recipes written entirely in biblical verses. Judges 5:25 called for butter, Genesis 18:6 specified flour, and Jeremiah 6:20 demanded sweet cane for sugar. This wasn't just wordplay, but a teaching tool that helped children learn scripture while preparing dessert. The cake was dense and fruit-filled, similar to fruitcake, but lighter in texture. African American churches embraced it during the early 1900s, making it centerpiece of fundraisers where women demonstrated both biblical knowledge and baking skills with pride. The tradition required time, patience, and a well-worn Bible kept in the kitchen. Today, scripture cake has nearly vanished, replaced by simpler recipes. Yet for those who remember, it represented more than dessert. It was education, devotion, and community baked into every layer. Molasses stacked cake graced weddings and homecomings with a sweetness born of patience and skill. Thin layers of spiced cake were baked individually, then stacked high with a rich molasses filling that soaked into the crumb as the dessert rested overnight. The dark syrup lent a deep flavor that spoke of both Caribbean cane fields and Southern kitchens. Families often baked the layers days ahead, turning the assembly into a festive gathering where aunts and cousins worked side by side. Each slice told a story of celebration and endurance, for molasses was affordable and plentiful even when other sweeteners were scarce. The cake's tall, impressive stature made it a centerpiece on tables decorated for special occasions, a symbol of abundance even in lean times. Today, few households take the time to roll, bake, and stack so many delicate layers, and the recipe lives mostly in old family cookbooks. Those who have tasted it know the quiet triumph of a dessert that rewards effort with lasting memory. Applesauce cake was wartime necessity that became beloved tradition, using applesauce to replace eggs and butter when rationing made those ingredients scarce. The applesauce provided moisture, binding, and subtle sweetness, creating surprisingly good cake from limited pantry. African American families embraced it during World War II and continued making it afterward because it genuinely tasted good. The cake was spiced with cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves, complementing the apple flavor while adding warmth. Raisins were often folded in, their sweetness enhanced by spices. The texture was dense and moist, similar to fruitcake but lighter. Some bakers added nuts when available. The cake kept well, improving after a day as flavors melded. It appeared at church gatherings and packed lunches where its durability made it practical. Applesauce cake represented resilience during shortage, proving that limitation could inspire deliciousness. Today, the tradition has faded, despite its goodness. It was the snowy, tender celebration cake that marked Easter, Christmas, and any Sunday when the whole family filled the house. Fresh grated coconut gave it a softness and smell that no bagged version can match, and older women took pride in the time it took to shred every piece by hand. The cake baked light and pale, then cooled beneath a blanket of frosting that held the coconut like the first snowfall of the year. Families cut it into squares and served it on paper plates after church services, reunions, or holidays that stretched late into the afternoon. But fresh coconut was work, real work, and as shortcuts filled the grocery aisles, the old version disappeared. Today, most people have only tasted the boxed version, but those who remember the real one can still feel the cool sweetness and hear the scrape of a coconut being cracked open on the kitchen counter. Red velvet cake once held different meaning than today's bright red confection, originally getting color from natural chemical reactions rather than dye. The original used buttermilk and vinegar reacting with cocoa to create subtle reddish tint, a mahogany rather than vivid red. African American bakers elevated this during the early 1900s, turning it into special occasion dessert for church anniversaries and weddings. The cake was tender and fine-crumbed with slight chocolate flavor balanced by tangy buttermilk. Traditional cream cheese frosting came later. Early versions featured ermine frosting from cooked flour and milk. The cake required precise technique. Overmixing toughened it, undermixing made it dense. African American women passed down specific methods, teaching daughters to fold rather than stir. When food coloring became available, bakers intensified the color, eventually creating today's vivid red. The original's subtle color and delicate flavor are mostly forgotten. Chess cake squares were the dense, buttery dessert bars that filled school fundraisers, bake sales, and family events with a sweetness that stuck to your fingers. They were made from simple ingredients: cream cheese, butter, sugar, and a soft base that baked into something rich enough to satisfy a crowd. Mothers made them because they traveled well, sliced neatly, and tasted even better the next day. Children circled the table hoping to grab the corner pieces, where the edges caramelized into a golden chew. But as more modern desserts took over and school functions changed, chess cake squares slipped out of rotation. Their simplicity became overshadowed by trendier treats, and fewer people remembered how effortless and comforting they could be. Still, one bite of that sweet, creamy top layer can take you right back to a cafeteria filled with laughter and folding chairs. Butter beans and rice were another cheap but comforting meal that carried families through lean times. Butter beans, with their creamy texture, were slow-cooked until tender, often flavored with a smoked ham hock or bone if one was available. The smoky taste infused the beans, and created a rich broth that poured beautifully over rice. My grandmother used long-grain rice that stretched a pot of beans into enough servings for the whole household. The dish was hearty, filling, and nourishing, feeding both body and spirit. Butter beans were inexpensive compared to meat, yet they carried enough protein to keep families going strong. Children learned to appreciate the soft beans and flavorful broth as part of everyday meals, and adults recognized their value in stretching budgets. It was not a dish of extravagance but of practicality, a dinner that turned cheap staples into something people looked forward to. Butter beans and rice told the story of resilience in kitchens where every penny counted and every plate needed to satisfy. Blackberry roll was summer treasure that captured fresh berry season in tender cake rolled around fruit filling, creating impressive jelly roll variation. The cake was thin sponge cake baked in sheet pan, then filled while warm with sweetened blackberries and rolled carefully into spiral. African American families made blackberry roll when berries were abundant and needed using quickly. The berries were crushed slightly with sugar, creating jammy filling that soaked into tender cake. Some versions included whipped cream in the filling, while others kept it simple with just fruit. The roll was dusted with powdered sugar outside, creating elegant presentation. Children loved the spiral pattern revealed when sliced, each piece showing purple berry swirl. The cake appeared at church socials and summer celebrations when blackberries defined the season. Today, jelly rolls remain known, but the specific blackberry version tied to summer foraging has largely disappeared. Corncob jelly turned what most people threw away into a shimmering golden spread that brightened plain breads and biscuits. After kernels were cut from the cob for other uses, the remaining cores were boiled for a long time to draw out natural starch and pectin. The liquid was strained, sweetened with a modest amount of sugar or honey when available, and cooked again until it thickened into a soft jelly with a delicate corn flavor. Enslaved cooks perfected this transformation, ensuring nothing went to waste and every scrap contributed to nourishment. Long after emancipation, rural homesteaders and Depression-era families embraced corncob jelly as a thrifty delicacy, and it still appears at Southern craft fairs and heritage festivals. The gentle sweetness and faintly toasted aroma offer a taste of memory and ingenuity. Corncob jelly proves that culinary creativity can turn the most humble remnants of the harvest into something beautiful, a spread that honors the perseverance of those who found flavor and comfort in the very parts of the plant others overlooked. Jam cake was Depression-era resourcefulness that stretched precious ingredients by using homemade preserves as both flavor and moisture, creating cakes that carried summer fruits into winter celebrations. The preserves were stirred directly into batter, usually blackberry or strawberry, providing sweetness while reducing sugar needs. African American families made jam cake during holidays when something special was expected, but money remained tight. The fruit pieces created texture, while spices like cinnamon and nutmeg complemented berry flavor. The cake stayed remarkably moist thanks to preserves, often improving after a day. Some bakers added black walnuts or pecans when available. The cake needed minimal frosting since jam provided richness. Making jam cake showed kitchen wisdom, demonstrating how to create celebration from stored goods. Today, with commercial jams replacing homemade preserves, traditional jam cake has largely disappeared. Boiled turnips with cornbread crumbs was another way families stretched cheap vegetables into full meals. Turnips were easy to grow and often given away, their strong flavor softened by boiling them until tender. My grandmother ladled the hot turnips into bowls and topped them with crumbled cornbread, the bread soaking up the broth until it became hearty enough for supper. It was plain food, yes, but it kept stomachs full on nights when meat was scarce. The bitterness of the turnips mellowed with time and seasoning, and the cornbread gave every bite body and comfort. Children might have grumbled, but they ate their fill because there was no room for waste. In the 1960s, this dish was common across kitchens that relied on ingenuity to make ends meet. It was a simple combination, yet it carried dignity because it represented survival. Boiled turnips with cornbread crumbs may not have been fancy, but it held families together through lean times. Pound cake made with evaporated milk was the kind of cake that held families together long before boxed mixes took over. It was dense, silky, and rich in a way that made every slice feel worthy of a gathering, even on an ordinary afternoon. Evaporated milk gave it a smoothness regular milk could not match, a creaminess that tasted like time and care. Older women baked it for homecomings, anniversaries, and repasts, knowing a good pound cake brought comfort without needing anything extra. You did not frost it or dress it up. You just sliced it thick and served it with pride. Every family had someone known for making the best one, someone who never wrote the recipe down because the real steps lived in their hands. But as life sped up and convenience took over, evaporated milk pound cake faded from the table. Today, it appears only at the deepest family events, usually when someone older insists on bringing it back. And when it does, it reminds everyone what real comfort tastes like. Stack cake was Appalachian tradition that African American families in mountain communities embraced, featuring thin layers stacked high with dried apple filling or preserves between each. The cake layers were more like cookies, thin and sturdy enough to support the stack's weight. Each layer was baked separately, then assembled with filling and left to rest, allowing moisture to soften the layers into cohesive cake. Some versions used dried apples cooked with molasses, creating dark, spiced filling. Others used whatever preserves were available. The resulting cake was dense and concentrated, with flavors intensifying as it sat. African American families made stack cake for weddings where guests each brought a layer, demonstrating community cooperation. The more layers, the more prosperity and good wishes. The cake also appeared at holiday celebrations where its impressive height created visual impact. Today, stack cake has become rare. Caramel layer cake was the dessert that demanded patience and rewarded devotion. The caramel icing had to be stirred over low heat for what felt like forever, and the smell of sugar turning gold was pure heaven. One careless second, and it would burn. But when it came out right, it gleamed like amber. African American women guarded their caramel recipes like secrets, each one slightly different, perfected over decades of Christmas dinners. The cake itself was tender and buttery, but the icing was the soul of it, sweet, smoky, and just shy of bitter. Served on special occasions, it was a symbol of pride, proof that skill and care could turn a handful of ingredients into art. The first slice cut through the glossy top like glass, revealing soft layers that seemed to melt in the mouth. No factory-made dessert could ever match it. Caramel layer cake was love, labor, and legacy, all baked into one beautiful confection. Sweet potato biscuits once brought warmth to breakfast tables and Sunday dinners alike. Mashed sweet potatoes blended with flour, butter, and a touch of sugar created a dough that baked into soft, slightly sweet rounds. These biscuits paired beautifully with salty country ham or a drizzle of sorghum syrup, offering a perfect balance of savory and sweet. Families often baked them in batches large enough to feed relatives and neighbors, turning an ordinary morning into a quiet feast. The natural sweetness of the potatoes gave the biscuits a gentle orange hue, a visual comfort as well as a culinary one. Children were often given the task of mashing the cooked potatoes, a small role that made them proud participants in a beloved family recipe. Today, store-bought rolls and instant mixes have replaced the slow, careful preparation of true sweet potato biscuits. For those who remember their fragrance filling the kitchen, each bite carries memories of kinship, generosity, and a heritage that deserves to be cherished. 7-Up cake was the bright, lemony potluck star of the 1960s and 1970s, the kind of cake you could spot across a crowded church basement just by its golden glow. The soda kept it tender, light, and fragrant, making each bite feel airy but rich at the same time. Mothers baked it because it never failed, because it sliced clean, and because it made the whole house smell like sunshine on a warm afternoon. Some people glazed it with lemon icing, others left it plain. But either way, it was a celebration cake, a cake you brought when you wanted to brighten a room. Children loved the sweetness, adults loved the moisture, and everyone loved that it tasted just as good on day 2 as it did fresh from the oven. But as new dessert trends arrived and soda cakes fell out of fashion, 7-Up cake slowly drifted off the table. Store-bought desserts replaced the homemade ones, and the simple genius of soda-based baking slipped quietly into history. Still, anyone who grew up with it never forgot the first bite, soft and citrusy and impossibly tender, like a little piece of childhood wrapped in foil. Mahogany cake was Depression-era brilliance, using cocoa and strong coffee to create dark, rich cake when chocolate was too expensive. Coffee intensified chocolate flavor, while cocoa provided color without requiring costly chocolate bars. African-American cooks developed this during the 1930s when making something special required creativity over costly ingredients. The cake was darker than regular chocolate with deep reddish-brown mahogany color. The crumb was tight and moist, standing up to simple frostings or powdered sugar. Some added buttermilk for tang, others incorporated sour cream when available. It appeared at church socials and birthday celebrations where families wanted festive treats without breaking budgets. Children didn't realize they ate thrift recipes because it tasted rich and satisfying. Cocoa and coffee created complexity store-bought mixes couldn't match. Today, with chocolate readily available, mahogany cake has faded from kitchens. Sock-it-to-me cake was the bright, bold spirit of 1970s black kitchens, a cake that made people smile before they even cut into it. It had a cinnamon and brown sugar swirl running through the middle, a playful surprise in a world of plain desserts. Families brought it to reunions and Sunday dinners because it was dependable, tender, and joyful. The glaze on top was simple, but gave the cake a shine that made it feel special. Children loved the swirl, adults loved how well it fed a crowd, and everyone loved how quickly it disappeared. It came from a time when home bakers mixed boxed cake bases with homemade fillings, creating something new without losing tradition. But as tastes changed, this cheerful cake slowly vanished from holiday tables. People forgot the pleasure of slicing into that ribbon of sweetness. Still, for anyone who remembers the 1970s, one look at that swirl brings back kitchens filled with laughter and radio music. Sorghum cake was rural Southern tradition that used sorghum syrup to create dark, robust cake when refined sugar was unaffordable. Sorghum had distinctive molasses-like flavor, slightly bitter but complex, that African-American families valued as sweetener grown and processed locally. The syrup was stirred into batter with warm spices like ginger and cinnamon, creating cake similar to gingerbread but with sorghum's unique character. The cake was dense, moist, and deeply flavored, standing up well to time without drying. African-American households made it during winter when its rich taste felt appropriate. Some served it warm with butter, while others topped it with whipped cream or simple glaze. The cake appeared at church suppers where its home-style appeal impressed guests. Making sorghum cake required understanding how the syrup's moisture affected batter. Today, as sorghum syrup has become specialty item, sorghum cake has largely disappeared from everyday baking traditions. Caramel layer cake was the Sunday showpiece of older generations, a dessert built around an icing that demanded patience and devotion. The layers were simple enough, but the caramel icing was where the pride lived. It had to be stirred slowly on the stove, watched closely, and poured at just the right moment before it tightened and turned grainy. Grandmothers guarded that moment like a secret, trusting instincts no recipe could teach. When it finally poured, it coated each layer in a sweetness that tasted deep and warm. On holidays, it sat in the center of the table like a small crown, but the time it required was also what pushed it out of modern kitchens. Few people today want to stand over a stove whispering prayers into a pot of sugar, so caramel layer cake slipped into memory, treasured but rarely made. Coca-Cola cake emerged during the 1950s when the soft drink company promoted recipes, and African-American bakers adopted it for moisture and unique flavor. The cake included Coca-Cola in batter and frosting, creating subtle cola taste working with chocolate. The soda's acidity produced tender crumb while carbonation added lightness. African-American households embraced it for church potlucks where something different was needed. The recipe was practical since most families had Coke on hand. Chocolate frosting was poured hot over warm cake, soaking in slightly for glossy finish. Some added marshmallows to batter, which melted, creating sweetness pockets. Others included pecans and frosting for texture. Children loved the soda novelty, while adults appreciated moisture lasting days. The cake became popular at summer gatherings when its beverage association felt appropriate. Today, while the recipe circulates, it's rarely baked. Black walnut cake was the deep, earthy holiday treasure elders guarded like something sacred. Black walnuts were hard to crack, hard to clean, and their flavor was bold in a way nothing else could mimic. That difficulty made the cake feel special, almost ceremonial, especially in winter when families gathered in warm, crowded kitchens. Many African American households saved it for Christmas because preparing the nuts took real time and real patience. Children helped crack shells on porches while older relatives sifted out the tiny pieces inside. The cake baked into a rich, smoky sweetness that store-bought desserts never touched, a flavor tied to laughter and tradition. But as black walnuts became scarce and expensive, families stopped baking it, and younger generations never understood the difference regular walnuts could not make up for. Now the true version is rare, kept alive mostly by older cooks in rural towns. Yet anyone who remembers it can still summon the taste, a flavor as proud and irreplaceable as the people who once made it by hand. 7-Up cake emerged during the 1960s when soft drink companies promoted creative recipe uses, and African American bakers adopted it for unusual moisture and subtle citrus notes. The lemon-lime soda replaced both liquid and leavening, creating incredibly tender pound-style cake with hint of citrus. The carbonation produced fine, even texture, while the soda's acidity helped tenderize. African American households embraced it for church potlucks and summer gatherings where its lightness felt appropriate. The cake required no frosting, just simple glaze made with powdered sugar and more 7-Up, creating glossy coating. Some bakers added lemon extract or zest to emphasize citrus, while others let the soda shine alone. The recipe was popular because most families kept soda on hand. Children found the concept clever, while adults appreciated consistently moist results. Today, 7-Up cake has faded as newer trends emerged. Hot milk sponge cake was the quiet, airy dessert that older grandmothers baked long before anyone relied on boxed mixes to do the work. The warm milk folded into the batter created a softness that felt almost weightless, a cake so gentle it barely needed frosting. Families served it with berries, whipped cream, or just powdered sugar dusted lightly on top. It was the dessert you made when you wanted something delicate but not too sweet, something that felt homemade without shouting for attention. As baking trends shifted toward richer and heavier desserts, this tender sponge cake faded. People forgot how satisfying a light cake could be, how its simplicity made room for conversation and company. Yet in the quiet kitchens where older women still measure by instinct, hot milk sponge cake lives on like a whispered tradition. 1 2 3 4 cake carried its recipe in its name. 1 cup butter, 2 cups sugar, 3 cups flour, 4 eggs, creating a reliable pound cake that never failed. This mathematical simplicity meant the recipe passed down orally, taught to children learning fractions beside their grandmothers in warm kitchens. The cake was dense yet tender, with fine crumb that held under heavy icings. African American families relied on it for birthdays and church gatherings, knowing it would turn out perfectly without written instructions. Some added lemon, others vanilla. A few chose almond for special occasions. Children recited the formula like nursery rhymes, ensuring tradition continued through generations. 1 2 3 4 cake represented democratic baking, accessible to anyone who could count. Today, while pound cakes remain popular, teaching the formula as memory device has disappeared. Hickory nut milk delivered rich nutrition from the forests when dairy was limited or unavailable. Hickory nuts were cracked and pounded into a fragrant paste, then steeped in hot water and strained to produce a creamy liquid full of natural oils and protein. This drink could be enjoyed warm as a morning beverage or used to enrich cornbread and porridges, offering sustenance without reliance on cow's milk. The technique drew directly from indigenous American practices, which African cooks learned and adapted to their own needs. Hickory trees were plentiful across the Southeast, ensuring a steady supply for those willing to gather and crack the tough shells. Even after emancipation, rural families continued making hickory milk for special dishes, and some Appalachian recipes still call for it today. Its smooth flavor and nourishing qualities illustrate how African American cooks combined local knowledge and Old World methods to create foods of lasting value. Hickory nut milk stands as a quiet but powerful symbol of ingenuity, linking the forest's bounty to a tradition of resilience and culinary skill. Coconut layer cake was once the pinnacle of special occasion baking in African American households, featuring tall layers coated entirely in shredded coconut that created dramatic presentation. The cake itself was tender white or yellow butter cake, but glory came from coconut covering every inch of frosting until it resembled a snowball. African American bakers made this for Easter, Christmas, weddings, and church anniversaries where visual impact mattered. The preparation was labor-intensive, baking multiple layers, making smooth frosting, then pressing shredded coconut onto every surface. Some used fresh coconut grated by hand, while others relied on packaged, sweetened coconut. The result was impressive, worthy of important celebrations. Cutting revealed pristine white layers, creating anticipation. The texture combined tender cake, creamy frosting, and coconut's unique chew. Today, coconut cakes exist, but the showpiece tradition has diminished. Rabbit and dumplings was the meal that turned a quiet woodland hunt into a hearty family supper when store-bought meat was rare. Hunters brought back rabbits dressed and cleaned, and cooks simmered the lean meat slowly with onions, carrots, and herbs until it fell from the bone. Soft flour dumplings were dropped into the rich broth, swelling as they absorbed the savory flavor and thickened the stew. The dish fed large households through cold nights, stretching a single rabbit to satisfy many plates. Children learned to roll the dumpling dough while elders told stories of patient mornings in the woods and the respect owed to the animal that provided the meal. The aroma of simmering broth filled cabins and farm kitchens, promising comfort after long days of work. With modern markets providing endless options, few families still prepare rabbit in this old style. Yet those who recall the tender meat and pillowy dumplings speak of a warmth and gratitude that no packaged dinner can ever replace. Million-dollar cake was the tall, pineapple-filled refrigerator cake families saved for the biggest moments, birthdays, holidays, or the kind of gatherings where every cousin showed up at once. It was cool, creamy, and towering, a cake that felt luxurious, even though it relied on humble ingredients like crushed pineapple, whipped filling, and soft layers. The magic was not in fancy technique, but in the way the flavors melded overnight, turning simple ingredients into something that felt like celebration itself. Families passed it around at reunions, slid slices onto paper plates, and marveled at how refreshing it tasted in the hot southern months. But as times changed and refrigerator cakes lost their place to trendier desserts, million-dollar cake became rare. Fewer people remembered how the layers softened just enough, how the pineapple brought brightness, or how the cake could feed 20 people without a complaint. Today it survives mostly in handwritten recipe cards tucked inside old cookbooks, waiting for someone to remember how joyful a chilled cake can be. Buttermilk spice cake was once a kitchen staple that turned simple pantry ingredients into fragrant celebration, using tangy buttermilk to create tender crumb, while warm spices filled homes with comfort. The cake combined cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, and sometimes allspice with buttermilk that reacted with baking soda to produce light texture. African American bakers made this during fall and winter when spice cakes felt appropriate. The cake was moist enough to last days without drying, making it practical for weekly baking. Some added raisins or dates for sweetness, while others kept it plain to showcase spices. The cake appeared at church gatherings and afternoon teas where its aroma announced something homemade. Frosting was optional. Many served it plain with coffee or powdered sugar. Today, spice cakes remain known, but the buttermilk version has faded as commercial mixes replaced from-scratch baking. Persimmon seed coffee emerged when imported beans were rare or too costly for enslaved communities. Wild persimmons dropped their fruit in autumn, and the hard seeds inside were washed, dried, and roasted until dark and fragrant. Ground and steeped in hot water, they produced a warm, nutty beverage with no caffeine but plenty of comfort on cold mornings. This practice carried forward after the Civil War, especially during wartime shortages when coffee imports faltered again. Families across the South roasted persimmon seeds alongside chicory or other local substitutes, proving the durability of this inventive method. The gentle flavor and toasty aroma made it a beloved alternative long after necessity faded. Today, a few heritage festivals still brew persimmon seed coffee to honor the ingenuity of those who first discovered its rich taste. The drink reminds us that creativity in the face of scarcity can yield traditions that outlast the circumstances that gave birth to them, turning survival into a legacy of flavor and resilience. Marmalade cake used citrus preserves to create bright, tangy cake that showcased African-American bakers' ability to transform pantry staples into special desserts. Orange marmalade was stirred directly into batter along with orange zest when available, creating cake with intense citrus flavor and bits of candied peel throughout. The marmalade provided both sweetness and moisture, making the cake tender and long-lasting. Some bakers added lemon marmalade or combination of citrus preserves, depending on what they had canned. The cake was typically frosted with orange glaze or simple buttercream flavored with orange juice. African-American families made marmalade cake during winter, when preserved citrus brought sunshine to cold months. The cake appeared at church gatherings and family celebrations where its brightness felt cheerful. The texture included chewy bits of candied peel that added interest. Today, as homemade marmalade has become less common, marmalade cake has faded. Spinach dip, served with crackers and vegetables, was creamy, savory goodness that children scooped up enthusiastically. The rich cream cheese and sour cream base mixed with chopped spinach and seasonings, creating dips that tasted indulgent. Aunties would thaw frozen chopped spinach and squeeze out all the excess water before mixing it with softened cream cheese, sour cream, mayonnaise, dried vegetable soup mix, and sometimes water chestnuts for added crunch. The mixture was stirred together until smooth and well combined, then refrigerated for several hours to allow flavors to meld and develop depth. Some families served the dip cold, while others baked it briefly to create warm, bubbling cheese pulls that made every scoop exciting. In 1970s, Black households, spinach dip represented modern entertaining, recipes that came from package instructions but became beloved traditions. Children loved spinach dip because the vegetables were hidden in creamy richness, making them willing to eat greens. Black walnut pound cake carried the wild woods straight into the holiday kitchen with a perfume unlike any other. Foragers collected the hard-shelled nuts each autumn, cracking them carefully to release the dark, robust kernels inside. The cake batter, rich with butter and eggs, absorbed the strong, earthy flavor of the walnuts, baking into a loaf dense enough to slice thin and savor slowly. Served at Christmas or family reunions, the cake announced both celebration and the success of gathering nature's bounty. Children helped shell the nuts, their hands stained brown from the husks, a seasonal badge of honor. Neighbors traded slices wrapped in wax paper as gifts, spreading cheer through the community. Today, imported walnuts and commercial cakes have replaced the ritual, but the memory of that deep, almost smoky taste lingers for those who once enjoyed a slice with coffee while snow fell outside and the house smelled of spice and toasting nuts. Wild grape connected plantation kitchens to the native abundance of the American South. Muscadine and scuppernong grapes grew untended along fences and forest edges, providing a dependable late summer harvest. Enslaved workers gathered the clusters and crushed them by hand to create a tangy juice that could be fermented slightly for a refreshing drink or boiled into a syrupy must used to season grains and greens. This technique echoed West African traditions of using fruit reductions to brighten savory dishes. After emancipation, muscadine wine and homemade grape jellies became hallmarks of Southern foodways, and small farms still produce them today. The careful gathering and slow simmering required patience and skill, qualities that defined the cooking of those who made the most of every wild resource. Wild grape stands as both a practical recipe and a testament to how African American cooks merged Old World techniques with New World ingredients, leaving a flavor that continues to shape regional preserves and beverages across the Carolinas and Georgia. Burnt sugar cake was a sophisticated creation that used caramelized sugar for coloring and deep butterscotch flavor, demonstrating African American bakers' understanding of sugar chemistry. The sugar was heated until dark amber, then carefully combined with water to create syrup that colored and flavored the cake. This was delicate work. Burn the sugar too much and it turned bitter. Not enough, and it lacked flavor. The resulting cake had warm brown color and subtle caramel taste. African American women made burnt sugar cake for special occasions where something elegant was expected, its refined flavor proving kitchen sophistication. The cake required yellow or white layers with burnt sugar syrup in both batter and frosting. Some versions included burnt sugar icing that created glossy, caramel-colored coating. The cake appeared at church teas and family celebrations. Today, burnt sugar cake has nearly vanished as the technique was passed down orally and has been lost with generations. Asparagus wrapped in ham created elegant finger food that introduced children to vegetables they might not try otherwise, the salty ham making the asparagus taste less intimidating. Mothers would blanch fresh asparagus spears briefly in boiling water until they turned bright green and became slightly tender, then plunge them into ice water. Each asparagus spear was then wrapped with a thin slice of deli ham, sometimes spread with cream cheese or mustard first for extra flavor. The wrapped spears were arranged on serving platters, sometimes secured with toothpicks if the ham wouldn't stay wrapped. In Black households during the 1970s, asparagus wrapped in ham represented sophistication borrowed from magazine recipes, appetizers that looked impressive enough for special occasions. Children loved them because the ham provided familiar salty flavor, while the asparagus added crunch and color, making vegetables feel like treats rather than obligations. Lemon cheesecake bore no resemblance to modern cheesecake, instead featuring layers filled with cooked lemon curd that African American bakers called lemon cheese. The curd was made from lemon juice, sugar, eggs, and butter, cooked slowly until thick and spreadable, creating intensely tart filling contrasting with sweet layers. This was labor-intensive baking requiring careful attention to prevent curdling and patience to assemble multiple layers. African American women made it for spring and summer celebrations when lemons were available and bright flavor felt appropriate. The layers were white or yellow butter cake, baked thin and tender. Some added simple buttercream outside. Others left it unfrosted to showcase lemon layers when sliced. The combination was refreshing and sophisticated. Children found the lemon too tart, but adults appreciated the balance. The cake appeared at church teas, ladies' socials, and family celebrations. Today, as lemon cheese fell out of use, the traditional cake has disappeared. Ham bone soup with vegetables was one of those meals where one piece of meat flavored an entire pot. A single ham bone, stripped of most of its meat, simmered for hours with onions, carrots, and potatoes until the broth turned rich and smoky. My grandmother would add beans or greens if she had them, letting the flavors meld into something far more substantial than the ingredients suggested. Families gathered around steaming bowls, dipping bread into the broth and savoring the flavor the bone had left behind. It was frugal cooking at its finest, taking scraps and stretching them into nourishment. The soup fed many mouths, warmed cold nights, and made do with what was available. In the 1960s, when meat was costly, a ham bone could be the centerpiece of dinner, proving that thrift and patience could coax flavor out of nearly anything. Ham bone soup with vegetables carried both practicality and comfort in every ladleful. Sock-it-to-me cake became a phenomenon in the 1960s, its playful name reflecting the era's cultural expressions and buttery richness making it coveted. The cake featured butter base swirled with cinnamon, brown sugar, and pecans, topped with vanilla glaze that dripped in glossy ribbons. The name likely came from Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, where the phrase became catchphrase. African American bakers embraced it for church potlucks and reunions where its dramatic swirl pattern stood out. Preparation required folding, filling carefully without overmixing, creating distinct ribbons. Some families added chocolate chips or extra cinnamon. The cake stayed moist for days, practical for busy households. Children loved the sweet crunch, often requesting corner pieces. Sock-it-to-me cake represented when African-American baking intersected with popular culture. Today, its cultural moment has passed, leaving it mostly forgotten. Collard green Potlikker soup captured the very essence of slow cooking and careful stewardship. After hours of simmering collard greens with smoked meat, the broth left in the pot was a mineral-rich elixir, treasured as much as the greens themselves. Families poured this flavorful liquid into bowls and sipped it with pieces of cornbread, believing it to restore strength and spirit after long days of work. Some added hot pepper vinegar for a lively kick, while others preferred it plain and soothing. Children learned early never to throw away the Potlikker, understanding that its nutrients were too valuable to waste. Neighbors often shared jars with the sick or elderly, turning the simple broth into a gesture of care and healing. Modern kitchens may overlook this tradition, discarding the liquid without thought, but for those who remember, the taste of Potlikker carries the memory of community generosity and the wisdom of using every drop the garden and the kitchen could provide. Fig preserve cake transformed summer canning labor into special winter dessert, using preserved figs for moist, fragrant cake. African-American families grew fig trees, harvesting fruit at peak ripeness and cooking it with sugar into thick preserves. These were stirred into batter with warm spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. The figs provided natural sweetness and moisture, making cake incredibly tender and keeping well for days. The cake was dense but not heavy, with fig pieces providing flavor bursts. African-American bakers made it during winter holidays when fresh fruit was scarce, but pantries held summer's preserved bounty. The cake needed no frosting, just powdered sugar, letting figs shine. Some families added black walnuts or pecans for crunch. Making fig preserve cake showed off both preserve quality and baker's skill. It appeared at Christmas tables and church socials. Today, as fewer families preserve figs, the cake has nearly vanished. Pokeweed greens offered one of the first fresh tastes of spring for people living with few supplies after a long winter. Young pokeweed shoots emerged early and plentifully, but they carried natural toxins that required careful boiling in several changes of water. Enslaved cooks, drawing on African knowledge of wild plants, mastered this technique to create a tender, spinach-like dish that supplied vital vitamins when gardens were only beginning to grow. Seasoned with a bit of salt pork or a sprinkle of wild herbs, poke greens became a welcome sign of the changing season. Long after emancipation, poke salad festivals in Appalachia and the Deep South celebrated this once humble plant, turning a survival ingredient into a community tradition. The careful preparation taught by generations of African-American cooks is still followed today, preserving both safety and flavor. Pokeweed greens remind us that deep botanical knowledge and patient cooking transformed a potentially dangerous weed into nourishing food that helped sustain families through the hardest times. Peanut butter cake was Southern ingenuity that turned cheap, abundant protein source into moist dessert beloved by children and adults alike. The peanut butter was creamed into batter, creating cake with subtle peanut flavor and incredibly tender crumb. African-American families made this during the 1940s and 50s when peanut butter provided affordable nutrition and familiar taste. The cake could be baked in layers or sheet pan, adapting to whatever occasion required. Some topped it with peanut butter frosting, creating intense experience, while others used chocolate for peanut butter cup effect. Children especially loved it, its familiar flavor making it comfort food at birthdays and church socials. The cake stayed moist for days thanks to peanut butter's fat content. Peanut butter cake represented democratic dessert, inexpensive, satisfying, and accessible to families at any economic level. Today, the simple cake version has faded. Watermelon rind stew reflects the creativity and endurance of people forced to survive on the edges of the plantation food system. The sweet red fruit was usually reserved for those in the owner's household, but the pale green rind, often thrown away, became a valuable ingredient for the enslaved cooks who transformed scraps into nourishment. Strips of rind were simmered slowly with onions, garden herbs, and whatever seasoning could be gathered or traded, creating a mellow broth rich in minerals and gentle sweetness. This practice traveled forward in time, inspiring the pickled watermelon rind that remains a hallmark of Southern home kitchens today. The dish is more than a recipe. It is a record of resilience, showing how African culinary knowledge turned waste into sustenance and flavor. In modern celebrations of African American foodways, watermelon rind pickles and stews continue to honor those who preserved health and dignity through skilled cooking even when denied basic freedom. Pickled watermelon rind turned summer scraps into something bright and memorable when waste was never an option. Families peeled the green rinds from sweet watermelons, cut them into strips, and simmered them in a brine of vinegar, sugar, and warm spices until the pieces turned translucent and tender. The finished pickles carried a gentle sweetness with a tart kick that balanced fried fish or smoky barbecued pork. Children often helped pack the jars, laughing as the kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon and clove. These jars lined pantry shelves and cooled in cellars, ready to brighten winter meals with a taste of summer. For many households, this thrifty condiment was a sign of careful planning and pride in making every harvest last. Today, few people bother to save the rinds, and the recipe hides in old notebooks and fading memories. Yet those who remember speak of the surprising pleasure of that sweet, sour crunch beside a plate of fried catfish. Lane cake emerged from Alabama kitchens as a showpiece featuring white cake layers filled with bourbon-laced raisins, pecans, and coconut. Emma Ryder Lane created the original in the 1890s, but African-American cooks refined it for weddings and Christmas celebrations. The filling required careful cooking to avoid curdling eggs, stirring constantly until thick, then folding in dried fruits soaked in whiskey. The cake layers were tender, contrasting the rich, boozy filling. Some bakers added preserves or extra spices depending on the season. Lane cake was labor-intensive, demanding patience that marked accomplished bakers. It appeared at important celebrations where its elegance impressed guests. Today, Lane cake has faded, overshadowed by simpler confections. Yet it once represented the pinnacle of African American baking, proving that celebration deserved something extraordinary. In the 1960s, fatback and cabbage was a reminder that flavor did not come from abundance, but from knowing how to cook with care. It was a dish that taught respect for every part of the animal and every leaf from the garden. Pork, fatback, and cabbage turned scraps into sustenance. Vegetable pot pie with biscuit crust was one of the cleverest ways to turn leftovers into a comforting meal. My grandmother gathered whatever vegetables were left from the week, beans, carrots, peas, or turnips, and simmered them in a simple gravy. She poured the mixture into a dish and covered it with biscuit dough instead of pie crust, which baked into a golden, fluffy topping. The result was hearty, filling, and deeply satisfying, stretching scraps into something that felt like a Sunday supper. Each slice carried both thrift and comfort, a reminder that nothing from the kitchen was wasted. The biscuit crust gave the dish substance, making it a true dinner instead of just a side. In the 1960s, vegetable pot pie with biscuit crust was common across homes that relied on ingenuity, turning odds and ends into meals that filled plates and warmed hearts. It was survival, wrapped in comfort. Food that told the story of resourceful families making the most of what they had. Black walnut cake carried autumn forest into African American kitchens, featuring nuts foraged from wild southern trees. Black walnuts had stronger, more assertive flavor than English walnuts, with slight bitterness balancing sweetness perfectly. Families gathered nuts in fall, cracking hard shells and picking meats, labor that made each cake precious. The nuts were chopped and folded into butter cake with brown sugar complementing earthy flavor. The cake was dense and aromatic with distinctive taste. African American households baked it for Thanksgiving and Christmas when nuts were freshly harvested. Some included caramel frosting playing against the bitterness. Others used simple butter icing. The cake represented connection to land and foraging traditions. Children learned which trees produced best nuts and when they were ready. Black walnut cake required work from harvest to table. Today, as foraging faded and black walnuts became specialty items, the cake nearly disappeared. Cheese wafers made with sharp cheddar and butter created crispy, salty crackers that children munched by the handful, their homemade quality far superior to anything store-bought could offer. Grandmothers would cream softened butter with finely shredded sharp cheddar cheese, then gradually add flour, salt, and cayenne pepper until the mixture formed a stiff dough. The dough was rolled into logs, wrapped in wax paper, and chilled until firm, then sliced into thin rounds and baked until golden brown and crispy. As they baked, the cheese melted into the butter and flour, creating crackers that were rich, savory, and addictively crunchy with just a hint of heat from the cayenne. In 1970s, Black households, cheese wafers represented Southern tradition and hospitality, recipes that had been passed down through generations. Children loved cheese wafers because they tasted like cheesy potato chips but felt more sophisticated since they were homemade. Poor man's cake was Depression-era miracle that used no eggs, butter, or milk, yet still produced tender, satisfying cake when even basic ingredients were scarce. The recipe relied on vegetable oil, water, vinegar, and baking soda reacting together to create rise and moisture without expensive animal products. African American families made this during the hardest years when every penny mattered and traditional baking seemed impossible. The cake was surprisingly good, with spices like cinnamon and nutmeg masking any absence of richness. Raisins or nuts were sometimes added when available. The cake was typically chocolate or spice-flavored, baked in single layer, and served plain or with simple glaze. Poor man's cake represented resilience and determination to maintain tradition even during deprivation. Children often couldn't tell the difference between it and richer cakes, proving that technique mattered as much as ingredients. Today, the specific Depression-era tradition has faded from memory. Sausage balls made with breakfast sausage, cheese, and biscuit mix, baked into savory spheres that children popped into their mouths like candy, their crispy exteriors giving way to soft, cheesy, slightly spicy interiors. Mothers would combine raw breakfast sausage with shredded sharp cheddar cheese and dry biscuit mix, kneading everything together until well combined. The mixture was then rolled into balls about an inch in diameter, arranged on baking sheets with space between them, and baked until golden brown. As they baked, the fat from the sausage rendered while the cheese melted, creating savory, flavorful bites that were crispy outside and tender inside. In the 1970s, Black households, sausage balls represented easy entertaining, a recipe that could be made ahead. Children loved sausage balls because they were perfectly portioned, required no utensils, and delivered breakfast flavors in snackable form. Roasted chestnuts carried warmth and nourishment through the cold months when plantation rations were meager and gardens lay dormant. Enslaved families foraged chestnut trees that grew wild in the surrounding woods, gathering the smooth brown nuts and roasting them in hearth ashes or iron skillets until their shells cracked and the sweet flesh softened. The nuts' high energy content and natural sweetness made it an important source of calories and comfort, especially during long winter evenings. Roasted chestnuts became part of a wider African American food tradition, appearing in holiday celebrations and roadside markets after emancipation. Their gentle flavor paired well with cornmeal breads and simple stews, and many families passed down techniques for roasting and storing them long after the plantation era ended. Today, roasted chestnuts sold at winter festivals and city street corners carry echoes of that history, reminding us that what began as a survival practice also nurtured community and seasonal ritual for generations who transformed hardship into enduring culture. Fresh apple cake captured autumn harvest in tender crumb, using abundant seasonal fruit that African American families grew in yards or purchased cheaply at market. The apples were peeled, chopped, and folded into spiced batter that baked into moist cake with fruit pieces throughout. Some recipes called for sour cream or buttermilk to enhance tenderness, while others relied solely on the apple's moisture. The cake was rustic and home-style, delivering genuine comfort without pretense. African American bakers made it during fall when apple trees produced more fruit than families could eat fresh. The spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, sometimes cloves, complemented the apples without overwhelming their sweetness. Children loved finding apple chunks in each bite, while adults appreciated the practical use of seasonal bounty. Today, while apple cakes exist, the tradition of making them from backyard harvests has faded with suburban life. Chicken wing stew was one of those meals that would surprise modern ears, since wings were once the cheapest part of the bird. My grandmother bought them in bulk when she could, piling them into pots with onions, celery, and carrots. Slowly simmered, the wings gave up their fat and flavor, turning thin broth into rich gravy. She thickened it with flour or cornstarch, serving it hot over rice or bread to stretch it even further. It was messy eating, but no one complained because the taste was so comforting. Wings may be prized today, but in the 1960s they were scraps, turned into nourishment by clever hands. She said every part of the bird had value if you treated it with respect. Chicken wing stew carried the spirit of thrift, transforming what others dismissed into something that filled the house with warmth. It was proof that good cooking did not depend on wealth, only patience and care. Lady Baltimore cake was refined white cake with elaborate fig and nut filling that African-American bakers prepared for the most elegant occasions. The cake featured fluffy white layers with filling of chopped figs, raisins, pecans, and sometimes candied cherries, all bound in fluffy frosting. This was showpiece baking, demanding skill and patience. The filling needed careful preparation, with dried fruits soaked until plump and nuts toasted to enhance flavor. African-American women made Lady Baltimore cake for weddings, church anniversaries, and celebrations honoring important guests, marking accomplished bakers as those with real mastery. The white frosting outside was typically 7-minute frosting, light and fluffy. Slicing revealed jewel-toned filling against pristine white cake, creating visual drama. The combination of textures made each bite interesting. Today, Lady Baltimore cake has largely disappeared, its complexity abandoned for simpler desserts. Giblet gravy over rice was one of those dinners that showed how nothing went to waste in the kitchen. Chicken was expensive, but the innards, the gizzard, liver, and heart, were cheap or sometimes even given away by butchers. My grandmother chopped them small, simmered them in broth, and thickened the pot into a rich gravy that smelled like Sunday supper. Poured over rice, it became hearty enough to stretch across the whole family. The rice soaked up the flavor, turning a small handful of giblets into a meal that fed 6 mouths without complaint. Some children turned up their noses at first, but hunger taught quick appreciation, and the taste of the gravy was strong, savory, and full of life. She said, "Giblet gravy was proof that dignity came not from the cut of meat, but from the hands that prepared it." In the 1960s, this dish carried people through lean nights, filling bowls with warmth when little else could be afforded. Giblet gravy over rice was frugality turned into something satisfying. Gingerbread layer cake transformed simple spice cake into elegant celebration by stacking multiple layers with lemon or caramel filling between. While gingerbread typically meant single-layer sheet cake, this version showed African-American bakers' ability to elevate humble recipes into something impressive. The gingerbread layers were spiced with ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, creating warm, aromatic base. The filling could be lemon curd for bright contrast or caramel for deeper richness. Some versions included whipped cream between layers, creating lighter texture. The cake appeared at holidays, especially Christmas, when gingerbread felt appropriate and festive. African-American families made it for church gatherings where its height and elegance created impact. The layers needed careful baking to ensure they were sturdy enough for stacking without being dry. Today, gingerbread layer cake has largely disappeared, replaced by single-layer versions or gingerbread cookies. Buttermilk cornbread baked in cast iron anchored countless suppers with its golden crust and tangy bite. The heavy skillet, seasoned from years of use, gave the bread a flavor impossible to match in a modern pan. Families stirred cornmeal with fresh buttermilk, a little lard, and a pinch of salt, then listened for the satisfying hiss as the batter hit hot iron. The result was a loaf both crisp at the edges and tender inside, perfect for soaking up potlikker from simmered greens or for eating plain with a drizzle of cane syrup. Grandmothers often taught their grandchildren to test the heat of the skillet by flicking in a few drops of water, a small ritual that connected generations. On Sundays after church, the scent of baking cornbread drifted through neighborhoods, promising a meal that united family and friends. Today, prepackaged mixes and quick breads have replaced the slow, careful method that once defined African American kitchens, and the art of true cast-iron cornbread grows rarer with each passing year. Crab cakes formed into mini patties were seafood luxury that made Thanksgiving feel extra special. The sweet crab meat mixed with breadcrumbs and seasonings before being pan-fried until golden. Grandmothers would pick through cans of crab meat to remove any shell pieces, then gently fold the delicate meat with beaten eggs, breadcrumbs, mayonnaise, mustard, Old Bay seasoning, and sometimes diced bell peppers. The mixture was formed into small patties, each one handled carefully, then refrigerated briefly to help them hold together during cooking. The crab cakes were pan-fried in butter until golden brown on both sides, the exterior developing a crispy crust while the interior stayed moist and packed with sweet crab flavor. In the 1970s, Black households, crab cakes represented coastal sophistication, bringing seafood traditions to holiday tables and elevating the appetizer spread. Children loved mini crab cakes because they felt fancy, tasted sweet rather than fishy, and came in sizes perfect for young appetites. Wacky cake was another Depression innovation, similar to poor man's cake, but with specific technique of making 3 wells in dry ingredients and pouring liquids directly into each. The recipe used no eggs, milk, or butter, yet produced tender chocolate cake through chemical reactions between vinegar, baking soda, and cocoa. African American families embraced wacky cake during the 1930s and 40s when traditional baking ingredients were beyond reach. The name came from the unusual mixing method. 3 wells poked into dry ingredients in the pan, each filled with different liquid. Water was poured over everything and mixed right in the pan, eliminating need for separate bowls. This one-pan method meant fewer dishes, important when water had to be heated. The cake was moist, chocolatey, and genuinely satisfying. Children loved watching the unusual preparation, making it memorable family activity. Today, wacky cake recipes still circulate, but the tradition has lost its Depression-era context. Fried chicken wings with hot sauce and butter created sticky, finger-licking appetizers that had children lined up before dinner was announced, their crispy exteriors giving way to tender meat falling off the bone. Families prepared massive batches on Thanksgiving morning, seasoning them with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, before dredging in flour and dropping into cast-iron skillets filled with bubbling hot oil. The wings fried until golden brown and crackling crisp, filling kitchens with aromas that drew everyone from every corner. Once drained and still hot, wings were tossed in melted butter and hot sauce, the heat always bold and spicy. In the 1970s, Black households, these wings represented abundance, showing guests everyone was welcome to eat their fill. Children loved them because they were handheld, required no utensils, and delivered maximum flavor with every bite. Butterscotch cake brought warm, buttery flavor through brown sugar and butter, creating distinctive taste that African American families cherished for special occasions. The cake used brown sugar exclusively, giving it deeper molasses notes than white sugar cakes. Some versions included butterscotch chips or syrup, intensifying the flavor. The frosting was typically butterscotch too, made by cooking brown sugar and butter together until thick, then beating in powdered sugar. The result was rich, sweet, and deeply satisfying, with caramel undertones throughout. African American bakers made butterscotch cake for birthdays, holidays, and church gatherings where something different from chocolate or vanilla was desired. The cake's golden brown color looked beautiful, and its flavor appealed to both children and adults. Some families added pecans or walnuts to the batter. Today, butterscotch has fallen out of favor, and butterscotch cake has become rare. Homemade cracklin bread filled kitchens with the savory perfume of pork fat and toasted cornmeal. Families saved every scrap of rendered pork skin, frying it until crisp and then folding the cracklings into cornbread batter rich with buttermilk and a touch of lard. Baked in a well-seasoned skillet, the bread emerged with a crisp crust and pockets of salty crunch that delighted children and elders alike. It was a dish born of necessity, ensuring nothing from the hog went to waste, but it also became a treat that people looked forward to at Sunday dinners. Neighbors often traded cracklings after a hog killing, turning the preparation into a social event that celebrated thrift and flavor. Today, store-bought cornbread mixes rarely capture the depth or texture of the old-style cracklin' bread, and few families still render their own pork. For those who have tasted it, the memory of that smoky, savory slice remains a reminder of community resourcefulness and the joy of making something extraordinary from humble ingredients. Glazed carrots with molasses and brown sugar were once the crown jewel of Christmas sides. Before canned vegetables and store-bought glazes, these carrots gleamed on every holiday plate. The slow simmer of molasses and butter gave them a caramel richness that coated each bite in sweetness and shine. The brown sugar melted into the glaze, creating something that felt both simple and luxurious. It was the kind of dish that reminded families that even humble roots could taste like gold. Kids loved it because it was candy in disguise, while grown folks loved it because it felt like tradition. These carrots weren't about fancy presentation. They were about love cooked into every spoonful. For many Black families, molasses was more than flavor. It was a memory of survival, a sweetener when sugar was scarce. That made these carrots more than decoration. They were gratitude on a plate. The scent of molasses bubbling in the pan filled homes with warmth, a sign that celebration had begun. Today, the dish has faded, but for those who remember, its sweetness still lingers in memory like a song you never forget. Sweet corn and onion skillet was the kind of dish that came together quickly, made from what the garden and pantry had to offer. Fresh ears of corn, or sometimes canned when the season had passed, were sliced from the cob and tossed into a hot pan with sliced onions. Lard or bacon fat did the work of bringing flavor, sizzling until the onions browned and the corn caramelized. The smell was sweet and smoky, filling the house with a promise of comfort even before the first bite. It was cheap, it was fast, and it was nourishing, the kind of supper that stretched across countless families trying to make ends meet. My grandmother served it with bread or cornbread, letting the skillet's juices soak into every bite. The simplicity was its strength, just vegetables and fat, transformed into something more than the sum of its parts. Sweet corn and onion skillet reminded everyone that even with little, you could still eat well. War cake emerged during World War I and II when rationing made traditional baking nearly impossible. Yet African American families found ways to create celebration anyway. The cake used no eggs, butter, or milk, all rationed items, yet still produced moist, spiced cake through careful chemistry. Raisins boiled with water, sugar, and spices created the base, with flour and baking soda added after cooling. The result was dark, dense cake similar to fruit cake but less rich. War cake represented patriotic sacrifice and creative resilience during national crisis. African American women shared this recipe widely, helping neighbors maintain tradition despite shortages. The cake improved with age, actually better after a few days as flavors melded. Some added nuts when available, though they too were scarce. War cake appeared at gatherings throughout both wars, symbol of making do and carrying on. Today, war cake has disappeared along with memories of those hardships. Chess cake squares were the dense, buttery dessert bars that filled school fundraisers, bake sales, and family events with a sweetness that stuck to your fingers. They were made from simple ingredients: cream cheese, butter, sugar, and a soft base that baked into something rich enough to satisfy a crowd. Mothers made them because they traveled well, sliced neatly, and tasted even better the next day. Children circled the table hoping to grab the corner pieces, where the edges caramelized into a golden chew. But as more modern desserts took over and school functions changed, chess cake squares slipped out of rotation. Their simplicity became overshadowed by trendier treats, and fewer people remembered how effortless and comforting they could be. Still, one bite of that sweet, creamy top layer can take you right back to a cafeteria filled with laughter and folding chairs. Macaroni pie, or Southern baked macaroni, was the soul of comfort in one bubbling pan. Forget the boxed kind. This was real macaroni, dense, creamy, and rich with evaporated milk, eggs, and sharp cheddar cheese. It was made to feed a crowd, baked until golden on top and firm in the center. Every family had their own version, passed down through generations, some adding a dash of mustard or paprika, others folding in onions for flavor. For Christmas, this dish sat proudly next to the ham or turkey, warm enough to melt your worries away. It was a dish of abundance, not because it was expensive, but because it stretched what you had into something that felt whole. Stirring that thick cheese sauce by hand was an act of care, something done with patience and pride. The macaroni pie symbolized celebration, hospitality, and a love of making something perfect out of the ordinary. The sound of a spoon scraping the crusty edges was as comforting as a hymn. Even now, its scent can bring back a lifetime of family gatherings, laughter, and full hearts. $1 Million Cake was the tall, pineapple-filled refrigerator cake families saved for the biggest moments, birthdays, holidays, or the kind of gatherings where every cousin showed up at once. Fried green tomato slices served with remoulade sauce were crispy, tangy bites that introduced children to Southern traditions, the cornmeal coating providing crunch while the tart tomato inside stayed firm and flavorful. Mothers would slice green tomatoes thick, dredge them in seasoned cornmeal mixed with flour and spices, then fry them in hot oil until golden brown and crispy. The remoulade sauce was made from mayonnaise, mustard, pickles, capers, and spices, creating a tangy, creamy dip that complemented the fried tomatoes perfectly. Each slice was served hot with a small dish of sauce for dipping, the combination of temperatures and textures making every bite interesting. In 1970s, Black households, fried green tomatoes represented end-of-season resourcefulness, using tomatoes that wouldn't ripen before frost to create something delicious. Children loved fried green tomatoes because they were crispy like French fries but tasted tangy and different, expanding their understanding of what vegetables could be. Chinquapin nut cakes offered small moments of sweetness created from the rich forests of the American South. The chinquapin, a dwarf chestnut native to the region, produced small, sweet nuts that could be eaten raw or roasted. Enslaved families collected these nuts in autumn, cracked their shells, and ground the meat into a fine meal. Mixed with a little cornmeal, honey, or molasses when available, the nut meal formed small cakes that were baked or cooked on a griddle until golden brown. These cakes carried both nutrition and a sense of celebration, providing rare treats for special gatherings. The flavor, slightly sweeter than a chestnut with a buttery finish, became a cherished memory passed down through generations. Even after emancipation, chinquapin nuts remained a prized wild harvest in Appalachian and Southern communities, though the trees have grown scarce in modern times. Chinquapin nut cakes remind us of the connection between forest abundance and human creativity, transforming a foraged ingredient into a dessert that honored both the landscape and the people who carefully tended its secrets. Molasses spice cake was the warm, thrifty dessert that carried African American families through lean years, long before sugar was cheap or bakeries were crowded with choices. Made from molasses, spices, and a little fat, it baked into something far richer than anyone expected from such simple ingredients. During the Depression and well into the 1960s, molasses was the sweetener families trusted because it was affordable and always on hand. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger turned the batter into a dark, fragrant cake that tasted like comfort and endurance. Children believed this was what holidays were meant to taste like: warm, dense, deeply flavored. Slices traveled to neighbors, church gatherings, and school lunches. But as sugar grew cheaper and new desserts became popular, molasses cake faded from view. Younger cooks dismissed it without realizing how much history lived inside that dark sweetness. Today it sits mostly in old handwritten recipes, waiting for someone to bring it back. For those who grew up with it, no modern cake replaces the steady comfort it offered during hard times. Crocheted tree skirts and doilies carried quiet elegance born from patience. Grandmothers sat by lamplight, looping yarn into delicate lace that would outlast decades, their fingers moving with rhythm learned from years of care. Each piece had its own story, whether it was made during hard winters or long summers of waiting. Placed under Christmas trees, the skirts caught falling pine needles like soft snow, protecting the floor while adding a touch of grace. Over tables, doilies framed bowls of fruit or sweet potato pie cooling for guests. They were made to be both beautiful and useful, the perfect balance of pride and practicality. Younger generations watched, sometimes learning, sometimes just marveling at how something so intricate came from simple thread. No store-bought decoration ever carried that kind of soul. When the holidays ended, they were folded away like treasures, waiting to shine again next December. Texas sheet cake was the one-pan wonder that fed entire church crowds without ever looking complicated. Baked thin in a large pan, poured with warm chocolate icing while still hot, it created a glossy top that cracked slightly as it cooled. Families carried it to potlucks, picnics, and homecomings because it sliced clean and stretched far. It was the cake you made when you needed something dependable, something that tasted rich but never felt heavy. Children remembered the warm icing dripping down the sides of the pan. Adults remembered how one cake could feed 30 people. Yet as gatherings changed and dessert tables grew more elaborate, Texas sheet cake drifted off the holiday menus. But anyone who grew up with it can still close their eyes and remember the taste, soft, chocolatey, and shared with a room full of people you loved. Sweet potato pie with brown sugar meringue crowned holiday tables with a beauty that matched its flavor. Smooth, mashed sweet potatoes blended with warm spices created a filling as rich as any custard, poured into a flaky handmade crust. The crowning touch was a cloud of meringue whipped with brown sugar until caramel-scented peaks formed and browned lightly in the oven. Families saved the first slice for honored guests or elders, a sign of respect and affection. The pie carried the sweetness of the southern soil and the skill of generations who knew how to stretch simple ingredients into celebration. Children licked the mixing bowls clean while parents watched the meringue rise, a shared moment of anticipation before the feast. Over time, commercial pies and instant mixes dulled the tradition, but those who remember the warm aroma of brown sugar meringue know that this dessert is more than food. It is a memory of family love, patient hands, and the quiet pride of homemade beauty. Old Southern tea cake loaf was the soft, tender slice elders brought out when someone knocked on the door without warning. It was not a cookie like people imagine today, but a pale loaf flavored with vanilla, nutmeg, or lemon, baked for the purpose of hospitality itself. In many African American homes, it sat wrapped in wax paper, because you never knew when a neighbor or cousin might stop by. It did not need frosting because the comfort lived in the crumb, in the way it broke gently beside a cup of tea or coffee. Older women baked it on quiet afternoons, humming while the kitchen filled with the smell of butter and sugar warming together. Children knew the first slice went to guests, but they waited for the end pieces, soft and sweet with extra browning. As visits became planned and store-bought desserts replaced homemade ones, this simple loaf faded. Younger generations forgot how one cake on the counter could open the door to conversation and connection. Today, it appears mostly in stories from elders who remember kitchens that always smelled warm and welcoming. Yet one bite is still enough to bring back low voices talking in the next room, coffee brewing on the stove, and a home that stayed ready to open its door. Cornmeal dumplings in tomato broth were the type of dish that felt simple but filling, carrying both thrift and comfort in every bowl. The broth began with canned or fresh tomatoes, cooked down with onions, garlic, and a touch of seasoning to build a savory base. My grandmother mixed cornmeal with a bit of flour, salt, and water to form small dumplings, dropping them carefully into the bubbling pot. As they simmered, the dumplings softened into tender bites, soaking up the tang of the tomatoes while thickening the stew. The smell alone brought everyone to the kitchen, the blend of corn and tomato promising something hearty without needing meat. Cornmeal was cheap and always on hand, a staple in Black households across the South. Tomato broth was inexpensive too, whether from garden harvests or canned goods bought in bulk. Together, they created a meal that cost next to nothing but filled hungry stomachs with warmth. Cornmeal dumplings in tomato broth turned two of the humblest ingredients into a family staple, proving that frugality and care could produce meals worth remembering. Banana nut sheet cake was the practical, tender solution to a kitchen full of ripening bananas, the kind that spotted faster than families could eat them. Instead of wasting the fruit, older cooks mashed them into cake batter, folded in nuts, and baked the mixture in a large pan that always came out moist and fragrant. This sheet cake was soft, comforting, and topped with cream cheese frosting if the household had the ingredients on hand. It became a favorite for birthdays, potlucks, and late-night gatherings because it fed a crowd without much trouble. The flavor felt homespun, not fancy, but deeply satisfying with every bite. Children scraped frosting off the corners, adults appreciated its simplicity, and everyone loved how the bananas kept the cake tender for days. But as boxed banana breads and store-bought pastries became common, homemade banana nut sheet cake slowly disappeared. The younger generations lost touch with the joy of turning nearly spoiled fruit into something celebratory. Still, those who remember the smell of bananas warming in the oven know this cake carried a sweetness no bakery can match. Pumpkin stew with onions was the kind of dish that proved homegrown vegetables could anchor a meal. Pumpkins were easy to plant, easy to store, and yielded enough flesh to keep a family fed for weeks. My grandmother peeled chunks of pumpkin, cooked them down with onions, and let the pot simmer until it turned thick and savory. The sweetness of the pumpkin mixed with the sharpness of onion, creating a balance that felt hearty and satisfying. Sometimes she added a little pepper or a leftover bone for extra flavor, but even plain, the stew was filling. Served with bread or cornbread, it was enough to feed a household without meat or costly ingredients. In the 1960s, pumpkins were not just for pies or holidays, they were staples, pulled from backyard gardens and turned into supper. The stew carried warmth, thrift, and creativity in every spoonful. Pumpkin stew with onions showed that survival did not mean going without taste, only learning to love what the land gave freely. Butter rum pound cake was the cozy winter gift passed from neighbor to neighbor when the cold settled in and holidays drew near. It was a golden cake infused with butter, sugar, and a splash of rum flavoring that made the whole house smell like warmth. African-American families baked it as a gesture of care, wrapping slices in foil and delivering them to friends, church elders, or anyone who needed a little seasonal cheer. The cake baked dense and smooth, with a delicate rum glaze poured over the top while still warm. It felt festive without being showy, sweet without being overwhelming, and welcoming in a way only homemade cakes can be. Children knew this was a grown folks' cake meant for company, not for running in and out of the kitchen grabbing pieces. Over the years, as neighborhoods changed and door-to-door visiting became less common, the tradition of gifting pound cakes softened. Store-bought treats took their place, and butter rum pound cake faded into memory. But anyone who has tasted its buttery sweetness knows it carries the quiet magic of community and care. Pineapple upside-down cake was pure Sunday sunshine baked in a skillet. Mama would melt butter and brown sugar first, letting it bubble just enough to coat the bottom before laying perfect golden rings of pineapple in place. A bright red cherry sat in the center of each ring, like jewels in a crown. The batter poured on top was thick and sweet, sealing the fruit in a sugary glaze that caramelized as it baked. When it flipped out of the pan, everyone held their breath until it landed, glistening, golden, and smelling like heaven. The cake was soft and airy, the fruit sticky and rich, a dance of sweet and tart that no one could resist. Served warm with a dollop of cream, it was the definition of show-stopping simplicity. You could taste the pride in every bite, proof that beauty could rise out of everyday things. Pineapple upside-down cake was more than dessert. It was an event. Families made it to celebrate, to impress, or simply to make Sunday feel extra sweet. The first slice always drew applause, the last one quiet sighs. It was the kind of dessert that made an ordinary meal feel like a moment worth remembering. Roasted gourd seeds turned the remnants of pumpkins and native gourds into a vital source of fat and minerals. After the flesh was cooked for soups or pies, seeds were washed, lightly salted, and spread near the hearth to dry before roasting. This simple preparation produced a crunchy, nutrient-rich snack that stored well through the winter and could be ground into meal or used to thicken stews. Similar seed roasting traditions existed across West Africa, where pumpkin and melon seeds were prized for both flavor and nutrition, and those techniques crossed the Atlantic with enslaved people. Over time, roasted pumpkin seeds became a familiar autumn treat in American households, sold at fairs and enjoyed during harvest celebrations. The practice illustrates how African culinary memory merged with indigenous crops, creating a food that moved from necessity to seasonal pleasure. Roasted gourd seeds continue to appear in modern kitchens and farmers markets, carrying with them the history of careful saving and the resourceful spirit that turned every part of the plant into nourishment. Molasses spice cake was the warm, thrifty dessert that carried African American families through lean years, long before sugar was cheap or bakeries were crowded with choices. Made from molasses, spices, and a little fat, it baked into something far richer than anyone expected from such simple ingredients. During the Depression and well into the 1960s, molasses was the sweetener families trusted because it was affordable and always on hand. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger turned the batter into a dark, fragrant cake that tasted like comfort and endurance. Children believed this was what holidays were meant to taste like: warm, dense, deeply flavored. Slices traveled to neighbors, church gatherings, and school lunches. But as sugar grew cheaper and new desserts became popular, molasses cake faded from view. Younger cooks dismissed it without realizing how much history lived inside that dark sweetness. Today it sits mostly in old handwritten recipes, waiting for someone to bring it back. For those who grew up with it, no modern cake replaces the steady comfort it offered during hard times. Coconut layer cake was the grand finale of any Sunday spread, tall and proud with frosting as white as a new tablecloth. Mama cracked coconuts by hand, saving every drop of milk and shaving the meat fine with patience born of love. The layers were soft and buttery, each one stacked carefully, then covered in billows of sweet icing that clung like snow. Every forkful carried a tender sweetness, rich but never heavy, with the faint crunch of fresh coconut catching the light. It was a cake made for special days, Easter, homecomings, or when company came calling. You could taste the care in every bite, the kind that took all afternoon but felt worth every minute. Children waited by the counter for stray flakes to fall, while grown folks admired the cake like art before slicing. It was the kind of dessert that silenced a table, not out of manners but awe. Coconut layer cake was not just food, it was ceremony, celebration, and memory covered in white. Even days later, the leftovers stayed moist, the frosting soft and forgiving. A slice of it could turn any Sunday into something sacred, proof that beauty could come from nothing more than butter, sugar, and heart. Molasses ginger cake was winter staple that combined robust molasses with sharp ginger, creating warm, spicy cake perfect for cold months. The molasses provided both sweetness and moisture, while ginger, fresh or dried, added heat and complexity. African American families made this cake during fall and winter, when its dark richness felt appropriate. The cake was typically baked in square pan and served warm with butter or topped with lemon sauce that balanced the molasses' heaviness. Some versions included chopped crystallized ginger for extra bite. The cake improved after sitting as flavors intensified and texture softened. African American households served molasses ginger cake at holiday gatherings and church suppers where its warming spices welcomed guests. The aroma-filling kitchens announced comfort and tradition. Children often found it too strong at first, but grew to love it. Today, while gingerbread remains popular, the specific molasses ginger cake tradition has faded, replaced by milder versions. Pork cracklin cornbread was a dish that made even a simple pan of bread feel like a celebration. Cracklins, small, crispy bits left from rendering pork fat, were cheap to come by and packed with flavor. My grandmother folded them into cornbread batter, the fat melting and the crunchy pieces scattering through every slice. Baked until golden, it came out hearty and rich, with texture that plain cornbread never had. The salty pork balanced the sweet cornmeal, making each bite feel indulgent even though the ingredients were inexpensive. Families sliced it thick and ate it alone or alongside beans, greens, or stews, letting the cracklins carry the flavor of meat through the whole meal. In the 1960s, this kind of dish made families feel proud, as though they had something special on the table despite the hardships around them. Pork cracklin cornbread was thrift turned into joy, simple food lifted by the spirit of making do. Carrot pineapple cake was the fruit-forward potluck powerhouse that once ruled church basements and fellowship halls. It was moist, dense, and full of grated carrots, crushed pineapple, and sometimes pecans, bound together in a batter that baked into something richer than the ingredients implied. African American families made it for large gatherings because one pan fed many people, and its flavor felt bright even in the coldest months. The cream cheese frosting was the finishing touch, smooth and tangy, spreading easily across the top. This cake traveled well, sliced neatly, and stayed moist for days, qualities any church cook valued deeply. But as grocery stores filled with bakery cakes and celebrations shifted, carrot pineapple cake faded into the background. Fewer home bakers grated carrots by hand or opened cans of pineapple just for one recipe. Yet those who remember sharing slices after long Sunday services still talk about its tender crumb and gentle sweetness. One bite tasted like fellowship, community, and a time when potluck tables stretched farther than anyone could see. Vinegar pie was the miracle no one saw coming. Born out of scarcity, it turned the simplest pantry staples into something unexpectedly elegant. When lemons were too costly or unavailable, vinegar stepped in, its sharpness softened by sugar and butter until it became a tangy custard pie unlike anything else. African American cooks perfected this balance between frugality and flavor, making do without ever losing touch with creativity. The first bite was sweet, then bright, then comforting, the kind of taste that made you pause just to appreciate it. Vinegar pie was proof that the best recipes often come from necessity, not abundance. During Christmas, when families stretched every dollar and every ingredient, this pie brought a sense of pride and accomplishment. It didn't glitter like a fancy dessert, but it didn't need to. It was a triumph in disguise, a humble, golden masterpiece born from ingenuity. Hummingbird cake was a dessert tied to African American gatherings in the South, combining bananas, pineapple, and spices into a moist, flavorful cake. It was generously frosted with cream cheese icing, making it rich and indulgent without being overly complicated. The fruit gave the cake natural sweetness and kept it tender, while the spices added warmth. Families served it at reunions, weddings, and Sunday dinners, where it became a centerpiece dessert that drew compliments. Hummingbird cake was often passed around in large slices, meant to be shared and enjoyed together. Its popularity soared during the mid-20th century, but over time it has quietly faded from many kitchens. Though still remembered in Southern cookbooks, it rarely appears on modern tables, overshadowed by trendier desserts. Yet those who recall it know it carried a spirit of celebration, a cake that symbolized abundance and care. Hummingbird cake remains one of those recipes that tells a story of hospitality and joy, baked with both fruit and tradition. Sock It to Me cake was the bright, bold spirit of 1970s black kitchens, a cake that made people smile before they even cut into it. It had a cinnamon and brown sugar swirl running through the middle, a playful surprise in a world of plain desserts. Families brought it to reunions and Sunday dinners because it was dependable, tender, and joyful. The glaze on top was simple, but gave the cake a shine that made it feel special. Children loved the swirl, adults loved how well it fed a crowd, and everyone loved how quickly it disappeared. It came from a time when home bakers mixed boxed cake bases with homemade fillings, creating something new without losing tradition. But as tastes changed, this cheerful cake slowly vanished from holiday tables. People forgot the pleasure of slicing into that ribbon of sweetness. Still, for anyone who remembers the 1970s, one look at that swirl brings back kitchens filled with laughter and radio music. Hand-pulled taffy candy brought winter nights alive with laughter and sticky hands. Families boiled sorghum or cane syrup with sugar until it reached the perfect glossy stage, then poured the hot mixture onto buttered slabs to cool slightly. Children and adults alike greased their palms and began the rhythmic pulling, stretching the warm candy until it turned light and airy. The kitchen filled with the sweet smell of caramel as ropes of taffy were twisted and cut into bite-sized pieces. It was as much about the gathering as the candy, a shared activity that warmed cold evenings and strengthened family ties. Neighbors might stop by to help, turning the process into a spontaneous party where stories and jokes flowed as freely as the sugary strands. Store-bought sweets eventually replaced the long, careful ritual, but the memory of shining taffy and joyful pulling remains vivid for those who once stood in the glow of a winter stove and felt the magic of homemade candy. Cornbread dressing with sage and gizzards was never written down. It was remembered. The smell alone could pull everyone into the kitchen before the pan even left the oven. The dressing was moist, peppery, and full of flavor that came from slow-simmered broth and scraps of meat that no one wasted. Every piece of gizzard, onion, and cornbread crumb had purpose. Women learned it by watching their mothers crumble bread by hand, stir broth until it felt right, and season not by measure but by memory. The sage gave it that unmistakable holiday taste, earthy and warm, tied to the idea of family coming home. This dish carried the spirit of resilience, using every bit of the bird and turning it into something worth celebrating. It stood proudly beside the turkey, sometimes outshining it. In church kitchens and home gatherings alike, pans of dressing were baked in iron skillets and passed down the table like heirlooms. The sound of the first spoon breaking through the crust was enough to hush a room. This was Christmas in its truest form, made from scratch, filled with care, and meant to feed both body and soul. Homemade cane syrup drizzle once gave biscuits and pancakes a dark, smoky sweetness unmatched by refined sugar. Families would harvest sugarcane, crush the stalks, and boil the juice in large iron kettles until it thickened into a rich amber syrup. The work was hot and sticky, often stretching from dawn until late night, but the reward was a flavor that defined Southern breakfasts and holiday treats. Children watched the bubbling kettles with wide eyes, waiting for a chance to taste the warm syrup on a fresh biscuit. Neighbors often shared the labor and the finished product, turning the syrup-making into a community event as well as a culinary one. Over time, industrial sweeteners and store-bought syrups replaced the careful craft, and the knowledge of how to coax sweetness from cane faded with older generations. For those who remember, a spoonful of homemade cane syrup is more than a taste. It is a memory of family unity, hard work, and the sweetness that perseverance can bring. Sorghum syrup biscuits with milk were the kind of dinner that showed how families found sweetness even in struggle. Sorghum syrup, cheaper than sugar, was kept in jars that seemed to last forever, poured generously over hot biscuits fresh from the oven. My grandmother baked the biscuits with flour and lard, ingredients that could be stretched and shared across multiple meals. Once the biscuits were ready, she split them open, drizzled them with syrup, and served them with cold milk poured into glasses. It was simple but filling, providing enough energy for tired workers and growing children. The sweetness of the syrup turned plain flour biscuits into something that felt like a treat, even if it was just supper. In the 1960s, this kind of meal reminded families that comfort did not always need meat or elaborate dishes. It was about making do with what was on hand and finding joy in it. Sorghum syrup biscuits with milk were a reminder that sweetness could soften the edge of hardship. Black-eyed pea salad carried luck into the new year before the clock even struck midnight. Served cold, it was tangy and refreshing, a rare contrast to the heavy holiday spread. The peas were cooked tender, then mixed with diced peppers, onions, and vinegar dressing that danced on the tongue. For many, it was more than a side dish. It was a ritual of hope. In African-American homes, black-eyed peas symbolized prosperity and renewal, a tradition passed down from ancestors who made meaning from what they had. Preparing them for Christmas meant faith in what was coming. The salad was easy to make but full of flavor, something that improved with time as it sat in the fridge overnight. The tang of vinegar and sweetness of onion created a perfect harmony of balance and belief. It was light yet powerful, simple yet layered with heritage. At church dinners and family gatherings, you'd always see a bowl of it, glistening, colorful, and made from the heart. It was the quietest dish on the table, but the one with the loudest blessing. Chicken liver pâté spread on crackers created rich, smooth bites that adventurous children tried, the creamy texture and distinctive flavor introducing them to foods that felt grown-up and sophisticated. Aunties would sauté chicken livers with onions and butter until cooked through but still slightly pink inside, then blend them with cream cheese, spices, and sometimes brandy or sherry until smooth. The pâté was chilled in molds or ramekins, then unmolded onto serving platters surrounded by crackers and garnished with chopped parsley or capers. The texture was silky smooth while the flavor was rich and slightly metallic in that characteristic liver way that some loved and others found challenging. In Black households during the 1970s, chicken liver pâté represented culinary sophistication, recipes borrowed from French cuisine and adapted to Southern ingredients. Children who tried it felt brave and grown up, stepping outside their comfort zones to taste foods their parents enjoyed at special gatherings. 7-Up cake was the bright, lemony potluck star of the 1960s and 1970s, the kind of cake you could spot across a crowded church basement just by its golden glow. The soda kept it tender, light, and fragrant, making each bite feel airy but rich at the same time. Mothers baked it because it never failed, because it sliced clean, and because it made the whole house smell like sunshine on a warm afternoon. Some people glazed it with lemon icing, others left it plain. But either way, it was a celebration cake, a cake you brought when you wanted to brighten a room. Children loved the sweetness, adults loved the moisture, and everyone loved that it tasted just as good on day 2 as it did fresh from the oven. But as new dessert trends arrived and soda cakes fell out of fashion, 7-Up cake slowly drifted off the table. Store-bought desserts replaced the homemade ones, and the simple genius of soda-based baking slipped quietly into history. Still, anyone who grew up with it never forgot the first bite, soft and citrusy and impossibly tender, like a little piece of childhood wrapped in foil. Maypop fruit mash turned the wild passion fruit of the American South into a rare dessert filled with tropical fragrance. Known as maypop for the sound of its hollow fruit when stepped on, this native vine produced aromatic yellow fruits that ripened in late summer. Enslaved foragers gathered the fruit, split the rinds, and scooped the bright pulp into a bowl with a drizzle of molasses or honey when such sweeteners were at hand. The result was a naturally tangy treat that needed no cooking and provided a burst of vitamins. The flavor, a cross between citrus and melon, delighted anyone lucky enough to taste it. Even after emancipation, rural families prized maypops for jellies and pies, and the plant remains a cherished wild edible across the Southeast. Maypop fruit mash preserves a memory of fleeting seasonal abundance and the creativity that transformed wild gifts into moments of celebration, proving that even in the harshest circumstances, people found ways to enjoy the bright, unique flavors offered freely by the natural world. Caramel cake was the showstopper of every Sunday table, a golden beauty that looked like celebration and tasted like devotion. Mama would stand by the stove, stirring sugar and butter until it turned just the right shade of amber, never letting it burn. The caramel frosting had to be watched, whispered to, and poured at the perfect moment, too soon, and it ran thin, too late, and it stiffened like candy. But when she got it right, it draped over soft yellow layers like satin. The cake was tender, buttery, and rich enough to make conversation stop mid-sentence. Folks cut it carefully, as though it might disappear if handled wrong. The sweetness clung to your teeth, the flavor to your heart. Caramel cake was not just dessert. It was a skill, a tradition, a gift that proved patience could taste like perfection. It was the dessert everyone waited for and nobody refused. Long after the plates were empty, people still talked about that frosting, shiny as glass and sweet as memory. It was a labor of love and proof that the best things in life take time, attention, and a steady hand stirred by care. Ham biscuits made with country ham and soft dinner rolls became handheld sandwiches that children devoured, the salty ham contrasting perfectly with the sweet, buttery rolls that held everything together. Mothers would slice country ham paper thin, the intensely salty, cured meat packed with flavor that needed only small amounts to satisfy, then tuck the slices into soft dinner rolls that had been split and buttered. Some families brushed the tops of the assembled biscuits with melted butter and baked them briefly to warm everything through and create slightly crispy tops. The combination of salty, savory ham with soft, slightly sweet rolls created perfect flavor balance that kept people coming back for more. In 1970s Black households, ham biscuits represented Southern tradition, appetizers that could be prepared ahead and served at room temperature. Children loved ham biscuits because they were familiar comfort food in easy-to-eat form, requiring no plates or utensils and perfect for grabbing. Blackberry jam cake was a dense, spiced dessert that once filled African-American homes with its rich aroma. Made with cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg, the cake was moistened with blackberry jam stirred right into the batter. It baked into a dark, fragrant loaf that sliced thick and tasted of both fruit and spice. Families prized it because it made use of homemade jam, often prepared from wild blackberries gathered in summer. This meant the dessert carried not only flavor, but also the memory of foraging and preserving. It was a cake served on special occasions, sometimes frosted but often left plain to let the jam speak for itself. The spices gave it depth, while the jam kept it moist for days, making it a practical choice in lean times. Blackberry jam cake represented tradition, resourcefulness, and the pleasure of stretching summer's harvest into winter. Though it has nearly vanished from tables today, it stands as one of those unforgettable creations that carried both history and heart in every bite. Wild plum chutney offered a burst of tart sweetness when sugar was scarce and fruit trees grew untended along plantation edges. Gatherers picked the small, deeply colored plums at peak ripeness and simmered them slowly with a little honey or molasses when available, along with wild herbs for spice. The result was a tangy preserve that enlivened cornbread, salted meats, or simple porridge, providing vitamins and variety in otherwise plain meals. This method of combining fruit with savory seasonings echoed West African chutneys and relishes, demonstrating a culinary bridge between continents. After freedom, African-American home cooks continued to prize wild plums for jellies and sauces, and many Southern families still make small-batch plum preserves each summer. The enduring appeal of wild plum chutney lies in its ability to turn overlooked fruit into a bright condiment that brightens any table. It stands as a flavorful link between survival cooking and the rich tapestry of modern Southern preserves that celebrate both heritage and the gifts of the wild landscape. Okra and tomato succotash brought color and heritage together in one bubbling skillet. Fresh okra pods, sliced thin, mingled with sweet, ripe tomatoes, corn kernels, onions, and peppers, creating a medley that linked West African traditions with Native American harvests. The dish simmered until the vegetables melded into a savory stew, thickened naturally by the okra's silken texture. Farmers' markets once overflowed with the ingredients every late summer, and families counted on succotash to stretch their crops and fill their tables. It was a side dish that could stand as a main course when meat was scarce, and its bright flavors paired beautifully with cornbread or rice. Elders told stories of ancestors who carried seeds and memories across oceans and frontiers, weaving history into every spoonful. Though many still grow okra and corn, the slow, careful preparation of true succotash has become rare, replaced by frozen blends and quick sautés that cannot match the patient flavor of the old garden skillet. Black walnut pound cake carried the wild woods straight into the holiday kitchen with a perfume unlike any other. Foragers collected the hard-shelled nuts each autumn, cracking them carefully to release the dark, robust kernels inside. The cake batter, rich with butter and eggs, absorbed the strong, earthy flavor of the walnuts, baking into a loaf dense enough to slice thin and savor slowly. Served at Christmas or family reunions, the cake announced both celebration and the success of gathering nature's bounty. Children helped shell the nuts, their hands stained brown from the husks, a seasonal badge of honor. Neighbors traded slices wrapped in wax paper as gifts, spreading cheer through the community. Today, imported walnuts and commercial cakes have replaced the ritual, but the memory of that deep, almost smoky taste lingers for those who once enjoyed a slice with coffee while snow fell outside and the house smelled of spice and toasting nuts. Pine needle tea offered a bright and restorative drink when fresh produce was scarce during cold months. Enslaved foragers collected the youngest green needles from longleaf and loblolly pines, rinsed them carefully, and steeped them in hot water until the brew released a light citrus aroma. Rich in vitamin C, this tea helped ward off scurvy and brought a welcome freshness to winter diets heavy with salt-preserved foods. The practice echoed both indigenous traditions and West African herbal knowledge, merging two continents' wisdom into a single sustaining cup. Families continued to brew pine needle tea well after emancipation, and it remains popular among modern herbalists for its gentle flavor and reputed immune-boosting qualities. Its evergreen scent and warm golden color remind us that even in the most barren season, the forest offered nourishment. Pine needle tea illustrates how observing the land and respecting its cycles allowed people to find both medicine and comfort, turning what others overlooked into a sustaining daily ritual that strengthened body and spirit alike. Mustard greens with smoked turkey necks carried the flavor of endurance from one generation to the next. During the Great Depression and later years when ham hocks became expensive or scarce, cooks turned to the neck bones of smoked turkey for the same rich depth. The greens simmered slowly in seasoned broth until tender, soaking up the smoky essence of the meat and the spice of crushed red pepper. Families gathered around the pot to breathe in the savory aroma while cornbread baked in the oven. This dish offered nourishment and warmth, proof that ingenuity could turn modest ingredients into a feast. Children learned to wash and tear the greens while elders seasoned by taste alone, passing down a craft more than a recipe. Today, pre-washed greens and quick cooking methods have dulled the ritual, but the memory of long simmering pots and the steady comfort of smoked turkey necks remains a powerful reminder of resilience and shared meals. Fried green tomatoes with grits was a cheap Southern classic that carried both tradition and thrift in every bite. Unripe tomatoes, plucked before they spoiled, were sliced, dredged in cornmeal, and fried until golden in a skillet of hot oil or bacon fat. My grandmother paired them with bowls of creamy grits, the cornmeal base that stretched across countless households for pennies. The tomatoes were tangy and crisp, the grits soft and warm, creating a contrast that satisfied both hunger and taste. It was food that came straight from the garden and pantry, without needing costly additions. Families ate it often in the summer when tomatoes grew in abundance, but it found its way to the table year-round. The combination of fried green tomatoes with grits represented resilience, resourcefulness, and the comfort of tradition. In the 1960s, this meal stood as proof that good food did not depend on wealth, but on knowing how to use what you had wisely. Chocolate mayonnaise cake was the dessert that turned thrift into pure genius. Born from lean times, it replaced milk and butter with mayonnaise, adding moisture that made every bite rich and velvety. Mama would mix cocoa and sugar into the batter until it looked like silk, then pour it into pans that smelled faintly of Sunday roast. The cake rose dark and even, its texture soft as a secret. Once cooled, it got topped with thick fudge frosting, whipped by hand, shiny enough to catch the light. Nobody believed mayonnaise could make something taste that good, but one bite erased all doubt. The flavor was deep, not too sweet, with a smoothness that made you close your eyes for just a second longer. Chocolate mayonnaise cake reminded folks that creativity could taste better than luxury. It was humble, clever, and downright delicious, a symbol of how resourceful hands could turn anything into something worth celebrating. Served after Sunday dinner, it always disappeared before the coffee cooled. Every crumb carried history, heart, and a reminder that love, like good cake, needs no fancy ingredients, just faith in what you have and a reason to share it. Goosefoot seed meal offered vital nourishment when cultivated grains were scarce or too costly. Goosefoot, also known as lamb's quarters, grew abundantly along field edges and yielded tiny seeds rich in protein and minerals. Enslaved harvesters shook the plants over cloths to collect the seeds, then winnowed and ground them into a fine flour. This flour could be cooked into hot cereal, mixed with cornmeal for bread, or used to thicken stews, providing a surprisingly hearty alternative to purchased grain. The practice drew on both African and indigenous traditions of using wild seeds as staple foods. Even after emancipation, rural families in parts of the Midwest and Appalachia continued to gather goosefoot seeds for their high nutritional value. Modern interest in quinoa, which is a close relative, echoes this old wisdom. Goosefoot seed meal stands as a reminder that careful attention to the landscape and patient handwork could turn what many considered weeds into a dependable source of strength and nourishment that kept families fed through the hardest seasons. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and onion were a dish that stretched garden vegetables into something filling and satisfying. Bell peppers were inexpensive when in season, and my grandmother made the most of them by stuffing each with seasoned rice, onions, and sometimes a bit of tomato. Meat was optional and often absent, but the rice itself carried enough substance to make the meal complete. The peppers were baked until tender, their skins blistering slightly while the rice absorbed every bit of flavor. Each stuffed pepper became its own little meal, portioned perfectly for children and adults alike. The aroma of roasted peppers and onions filled the house, signaling comfort even when budgets were stretched thin. It was a dish that looked impressive despite being made from humble ingredients, and it reminded families that presentation mattered too. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and onion carried both thrift and pride, proving that even in hard times, dinner could be hearty, healthy, and beautiful on the table. Old-fashioned burnt sugar cake was the labor of love that only the most patient elders attempted, a cake whose flavor came from caramelizing sugar slowly until it reached a deep amber color. The caramel was stirred into the batter, giving the cake a warm, almost smoky sweetness that set it apart from anything else on the table, making it required attention and skill. Burn the sugar too much and it turned bitter, too little, and the flavor fell flat. Families respected the bakers who mastered it, knowing the cake represented tradition, memory, and the kind of cooking done without rushing. The frosting, often made from the same caramel base, coated the cake in a glossy layer that melted on the tongue. Over time, as people moved toward easier recipes, burnt sugar cake faded from holiday spreads. Younger bakers found it intimidating, and many never tasted the original to understand why elders loved it so fiercely. Today it survives mostly in faded notebooks and stories told across kitchen tables. But for those who remember that first bite, the flavor was unforgettable, bold, warm, and full of the past. Which forgotten cake would you revive? Drop it in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more forgotten flavors.